Okay, you're right. Okay, you're right. We are gathered here again for another episode because, well, we're still doing this bitch. And much as my enemies would have probably wanted me to stop, well, we're still doing this. Although, actually, now that I think about it, I don't even have enemies right now. Why the hell am I saying any of this shit? Anyways, this episode is about understanding because, well, I seem to have some understanding of guys and women don't seem to have that much understanding. So, listening to me is a pretty good idea for both sides. Either way, I know there's some bits that are there to be understood, and I'm not gonna lie, some things I may not entirely understand, but I am still going to talk about them. And hopefully you'll help me understand that as well. And to kick things off, I want to talk about something that I didn't actually understand, which was a story whereby a 30-year-old man from Kilifi died after choking on his own saliva during intimacy with his girlfriend. Now, I read this title and I did not know how to process any of it because, I know people might have their ideas and jokes about this entire thing, but it's probably not even what you think because, I read the story and it's actually way worse. It's way worse than I thought. And I do intend on talking about that, but before I do that, I need to unleash my dickish side, which I need to make sure is clean, so...
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
So the story reads, and I quote, "In Kilifi, a tragic accident occurred where a man tragically lost his life after choking on his saliva during an intimate moment with his girlfriend. The incident was reported to the Kilifi police station by Cecilia, who stated that her boyfriend, Bernard, had visited her rented residence. While engaging in foreplay, Bernard choked on his saliva and collapsed. Cecilia immediately sought help from her neighbors and rushed Bernard to Kilifi County Hospital. Tragically, upon arrival, medical professionals pronounced him dead. The police visited the scene to document the incident, and Bernard's body currently rests at the Kilifi County Hospital morgue awaiting a post-mortem examination to determine the exact cause of death." End quote. Okay, now let's just think about this for a little bit. This nigga choked during intimacy, not during sex. That is the thing that was actually bothering me for a bit. People are already ready. I know a bunch of people who are ready with their jokes on the whole choke me baby thing, or, when you tell your partner to choke you and they decide to take it seriously, or you decide to take matters into your own hands or neck at this point. People already had these jokes ready of this guy choking, and, because it was an intimate moment, they assumed that it was sex. But it is now being stated that it is foreplay, which is odd and very hard to fathom because I'm trying to think about this in a realistic scenario. I know I like thick women, and dude was probably down bad, dude was probably horny, and dude was thirsty as shit, but you can't tell me that his saliva was that thick that the guy could not survive it. If his saliva was that thick, I need women to be that thick as well. What kind of saliva was it? Also, considering that it was classified as foreplay can entail a lot of different things. Dude probably was going down on the babe, and shorty had the thickest amount of cream that was coming, and dude accidentally decided to lick that shit. It could have been a situation where shorty had been cheating on dude with, some mafia boss, and how them kids tend to be, and considering that they're from a mafia boss, the sperm could technically be classified as child soldiers. So, they decided to go and lay waste to the man's neck from the inside, and the guy died. There's so many ways to try and describe this, but none of them actually make sense, which is quite sad. So unfortunately, I have to leave it at that and try to throw some more life on this podcast by trying to give it some sort of an instrumental and an intro that sounds a little bit better than the death I was talking about, which is practically just me saying, "Welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit." The man on the mic is a man who would not be caught dead trying to get intimate with someone without the intentions of taking it somewhere. Oh, wait, I think we just caught someone. He is a man who believes that astrology should have been the study of ass. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This episode might have started with death, but I feel like it leaves more questions than answers because what the hell is that guy's eulogy gonna be like? Dude was chasing pleasure, but he didn't get there. Man's frankly died with a whole stack of blue balls. Imagine him reappearing as a ghost with a boner and a bunch of blue balls. No matter what other ghosts he could possibly shag, the guy is still going to have it. It's such a sad situation for him. Imagine him trying to get into the pearly gates with a boner. I am struggling to make sense of all of this, just the same way that guy's neck was probably struggling to make sense of it as well, considering that like maybe a couple of seconds ago, it just felt like, the guy at the top is probably just making out. Then what the fuck is this bunch of thick ass saliva doing right next to me? Get the fuck out. And then dude gets asphyxiated. But anyways, all that said and done, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I hope you listen all the way till the end. And considering that this is a Friday episode, it is one of those episodes where I get to dive into the wonderful world of X, or Twitter if you still call it that. And I break down a couple of other tweets because I usually like discussing some of the things that you guys say out here. Because sometimes there's sense, sometimes there's nonsense, and most times there's usually a mixture of both. And it is one of those moments where you can suggest things that I can talk about, and I'll be more than inclined to deal with them. And the drill on how to do it is pretty simple. Almost sounds like a drill, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal Twitter handle, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. On Facebook and on IG, if it happens to be a screenshot, a screen grab, or ended up on a reel, then the place to send it to is @TheBreaktime_podcast on IG or @TheBreaktime_podcast on Facebook, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. Now, I have a couple of tweets that I need to get into, and I kid you the hell not, they revolve around guys, but in at least most of them, it actually does involve women. And actually, before I even get into anything, quick update. If you're not the biggest fan of social media, or you don't have social media and you want to reach me without having to go through social media, there's now a link in the description which usually asks for feedback, which you can use to get at me directly, whether it's to ask questions, whether it's to recommend episode ideas or certain things that should be discussed. And it'll usually be at either the top or the bottom of the description. So if at any point you do want to do that, then you can do that, and I will receive the communication and I will most likely respond to it in episode or on a particular episode going forward. Now, with that said, I need to get into the tweets real quick, but before I do that, I want to address something that I saw on Twitter. It was actually a post that someone had put up which had stated that it was advice needed, and it was someone who had actually written up a message on the NGL app to the person, and they said, and I quote, "My husband and I have 3 kids, but he still loves sex too much. At least every weekend he must demand for sex. It's too much for me. I'm an introvert, so there's not many friends to ask this. Will it be bad if I tell him to get a second wife or a mistress for sex? I can't keep up, please." End quote. Now, this is one of those very rare situations where you hear a babe actually saying that they are comfortable, or at least expressing some level of openness to the idea, or even comfort with the idea of their man having relations with another woman or other women. And this isn't something that you normally see happen, but it's pretty interesting. I don't want to say that it's good that it happens, but it is a pretty interesting and sort of positive light, because it shows that she cares about the man so much so that she is willing to let him get satisfied elsewhere so that she can have her own level of peace. Probably she has low libido or some shit like that. But with that said, there are pros and cons to all of this, like with many other things. And while for a lot of guys this seems like it would be heaven for them if they heard that from their wives, I don't know if it would be the best idea for either side. Although, before I can say anything more about this, considering that these are married individuals that we are talking about, I need to give our disclaimer so that I can have a little bit more comfort in what it is that I say. And that disclaimer is, considering that I am currently not married, neither have I ever been married, anything that I say in regards to marriage is purely speculation and should not be treated as factual information or advice. Listener discretion is advised. End quote. Actually, I think I need to start adding that whole listener discretion is advised thing. I think it actually sounds pretty cool. But anyways, with that said, now when it comes to the whole idea of getting an additional partner, or at least allowing your partner to have multiple relations with other people outside of your union, that agreement is something that I guess up until recently hasn't been a very publicized thing. People normally don't even talk about it all that much publicly. And even in quite a number of instances, you find that even though that agreement is sort of there, it's unofficial, it's something that isn't spoken about between both parties, but it is something that sort of exists in the air as sort of some version of an unofficial rule. Like, you'll hear a lot of stories about women saying that they don't care if the man sleeps around, and they know that the man sleeps around, but they do not bother the man, they do not talk to the man, they do not try to address the matter, and they do not try to cause any tantrums because, say, for example, he treats them well, he doesn't bring all of those issues home, blah, blah, blah. And it is something that I have spoken about before. Now, allowing such a thing to happen does actually have pros. Don't get me wrong, like, it does have pros for the women. In as much as it seems like it's all about the guys, there are pros that actually do exist for the women, there are cons as well, and I am going to talk about both in detail. Now, I'll start with the cons because the pros I think seem a little bit either hard or just self-explanatory. Now, the cons of it is, if you open that Pandora's box, if you open that can of worms, the man might end up actually enjoying it so much that if at some point you want to stop it, because, say, for example, your libido has gone up because you're maybe at the stage of mate retention, or maybe there's something that's unfolded and people seem to be picking up on that information, so you need to slow it down. It might be very hard for the guy to do that, because if a guy gets sort of used to that sort of lifestyle, especially considering that guys do value sexual variety a hell of a lot more than people think, then it can become very hard to stop it because it's such a good lifestyle for some guys to have. Then on top of that, if the guy does start sleeping around, he might catch feelings for another woman and could possibly drop you. Now, if you're in a good enough of a union that the guy wants to sleep with you a lot, this probably won't happen. But the possibility of it happening in a number of other relationships or marriages, because I don't know how much your partners love you, is something that I can't ignore. But for the most part, at least with the way this babe seems to be describing her relationship with a man, from the few words I've picked up, it doesn't seem like it's very, very likely. Now, the other con is when some of these women also try to stake a claim for this guy. Maybe he's really good in bed, and maybe he sleeps with one person more than he does with others. Then some of those babes can sometimes try to be possessive and try to get the guy, and they try to wreck the home. But with that said, the pros are also there, because one, there's a lot more peace of mind, because if his libido is a problem for you, you've clearly taken it off the list. On top of that, you find that a lot of women, after they sort of leave the guy to sort of go and do his thing in terms of sex, they tend to be very easy to deal with. They tend to be a lot nicer. You find that sometimes the relationship can get better, because if the man knows that you've allowed him, and he doesn't feel like he has to hide things, or he doesn't have to act a certain way, then he can be himself and you can be yourself, and you guys can have a much better sense of each other and how each other is supposed to be treated. Also, for the guys that know that they have this sort of arrangement with their partners, especially considering that some of those guys might actually know for a fact that it probably isn't an easy decision, or just the fact that you decided to make that decision for them is something that can actually garner you more respect, because you are doing something that is actually selfless as opposed to selfish, and it can make them respect you more, want to treat you better, because they know that you've given them the allowance to do all of that which they like, and as such they will now want to make you even happier, because if you are happy, then you can keep it alive. If you are not happy, then you can cancel the arrangement, and they will just have to say yes, because if they don't say yes, well, then it's a classic case of infidelity. But all in all, is it something that I would advise people to do? I guess it depends. Some people might be comfortable with it, some people might not. Either way, having that discussion with your partner is always the most suitable step to take before you end up making any decisions on it. And with that said, I'm going to leave it at that, because that one seemed a little bit trickier to handle. And I will move it on to our tweets for the episode. So on to our very first tweet of this episode, which was posted up by a woman who said, and I quote, "Do attractive men get pretty privilege from society?" End quote. Now, the reality of it is yes. Yes, actually, pretty men, or at least good-looking men, do get a leg up in society to some degree. And you can say that, good-looking, attractive men, hell, even just tall men, do have some version of pretty privilege. Statistically, especially when you actually open it up to include tall men, not even just good looking, but tall men, statistically, your chance of getting into leadership increase because you are taller. So yes, genetics can help you there. You can call it pretty privilege to a degree, because just saying height privilege doesn't really help all that much. Of course, there's things like modeling and so on, but minus some of those bits where you would say is a reserve or a benefit for tall people, if you just center it on good looking, then what I can say for a fact is pretty privilege exists for men, but it's not as powerful as pretty privilege for women. Let me explain. Now, being a good looking guy out here in the world is a good thing, and people like a good looking face, and they are more likely to remember it because it doesn't look like every other face, at least to some degree, and it can garner you certain favor from the opposite sex and even from the same sex. But unfortunately for guys, because a lot of what we are valued for is beyond just our looks, it actually goes down to what it is that we do and who it is that we are. It means that we can't get away with things simply based off of our looks. Now, for guys, yes, you will be valued and you will get some version of pretty privilege because you are a good looking guy, but it sort of stops when you're unable to substantiate that privilege with some sort of effort or work that would make you look a lot better. So, for example, if you are the employee at work that is getting this pretty privilege as a guy, if you don't do fuck all in terms of work, if you are not a performer or if you do not do shit, then it's very easy for people to be like, he's just a pretty boy. And if you reinforce that with a not so good attitude, they'll just say that he might be a good looking guy, but he's an asshole. Actually, people expect good looking people, more so good looking guys, to be assholes. So if you are that and you do not perform, then you will be seen as someone who's just looks. And that sort of extends beyond it, because in a lot of other cases, you will find that pretty boys can pull a babe, but it's not like they can keep them if all they are is just pretty boys. And that's where the whole you have to substantiate your privilege with a bunch of effort for you to be valued as a man. So evidentially, I'd probably say in terms of advantages over the regular guy, I'd probably say that pretty privilege for good looking guys will probably be like maybe a 5 to 15% benefit above what you'd consider to be the average man on most regular day-to-day scenarios. With women, on the other hand, it's anywhere from like 30 to 80% when you look at pretty privilege. Because for women, because you are valued for your beauty to a pretty good extent, a lot of women can actually get away with being absolutely pathetic in terms of giving effort just by virtue of the fact that they're good looking. Also, because lust can drive a lot of guys into doing shit, they can give a lot of that pretty privilege to good looking women simply based off of the fact that they lust after these women or they want them to some degree. So, bottom line, pretty privilege does exist for men as well, but it's not as beneficial or as advantageous as pretty privilege is for women. And with that said, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our next tweet of this episode, which was also posed by a woman who said, and I quote, "It's 2024. Women shouldn't only be taking a man's last name. Why aren't men also taking a woman's last name? Oh, that's right. Traditional marriage was created to have ownership over women." End quote. Okay, so I'd probably, listen to someone ask the first half of that question and be like, you know what, I can see some of the appeal that some of you guys are making here, and maybe in some cases taking the woman's name might actually be beneficial for you, because some of these women come from some pretty powerful families, and having that family name can give you that level of advantage. And let's not play ourselves, some people's generational wealth and power will supersede whatever it is that you're gonna try and do in a lifetime. So, like for example, if I'm marrying a babe whose last name is Rockefeller, then I probably wouldn't mind taking the Rockefeller name. Having my family name right next to it is great and all, but having the Rockefeller name is gonna open way more doors than I could probably try and open with my name, regardless of how much power I try to climb up and get over my entire lifetime. But with that said, why is it that women actually take up a man's last name? Okay, from the cultural side of it, at least the way I see it from my upbringing and my cultural background, it usually comes in line with the fact that whenever a man marries a woman, it's usually a case of the woman being brought in and assimilated to the man's family so that they can continue to grow the man's family. And it's not even about ownership. Like, there's the whole dowry thing, and it's gonna seem like it's slave trade if you throw that in there. But no, dowry is actually a form of appreciation. But unfortunately, most people try to look at it as a form of ownership or slave trade, if I can call it that. And that's not really the case. That's not the cultural intent of dowry. Just so you know. Culturally, whenever a woman was being taken up by a man, or at least whenever a man would go to ask a woman's hand in marriage, her taking up his name was supposed to carry some level of pride, because this man would practically assimilate her into his family. So her taking up his name is pretty much her being fully assimilated into the family, at least in terms of her title and her reputation. Which is why, as a man, you maintaining a good reputation is not just beneficial for you, but beneficial for your family. If you fuck it up, then it affects your family as well. If you're capable and lucky enough that you manage to grow it in terms of power, Q Rothschild or Rockefeller or some other name like that, then it can also help your family quite a bit in terms of lining the path and tarmacking the roads that they may try to take up, whether it's in business or in some other industry, because your name can open the doors that would otherwise require a hell of a lot of effort from the regular average Joe. So at the end of the day, the whole preserving of the name thing, it's something that has mainly fallen on guys' shoulders as opposed to women. So for a woman to want the guy to take up her last name, not unless if she's ready to start trying to maintain and uphold a certain kind of reputation for the sake of the family beyond what it is that she currently does, I don't know if that's something that they're ready for. But then again, like she said, it's 2024. Maybe it could have some benefits. Either way, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our very final tweet of this episode, which was also sent over by a woman, which said, and I quote, "Dear men, why is it so hard for most of you to be faithful to one woman?" End quote. Okay, so I know that there's someone who's going to come up and be like, oh, men are meant to be polygamous because blah, blah, blah. Nah, fuck all. That's a pile of BS, at least in terms of how a lot of people try to define it. And it's not even related to this. Why is it that it's so hard for men to be faithful? And I'll even add today, it's because a lot of women make it easier for us to not be faithful. And that one might seem like it might rub people the wrong way, but let me just cook with this one and you'll see why I'm saying that. Now, if you kind of look at it, at the end of the day, you choosing to be faithful or not faithful is something that will evidentially fall to you, the person that is choosing to do it. You're the person in the union, not the side chick, not the side piece. And yes, your decision to be unfaithful is evidentially still going to come back to you, the individual that is in the union. But when you kind of look at it, considering that there's a lot of women that will be very open today, in this day and age, to sleeping with and having some sort of relation or relationship with a married man, when you look at the number of women that are very okay home wrecking, when you look at the number of guys that seem to be having quite a lot of success, yet they are married men in terms of picking up babes and, banging them and having relationships with them, then you can clearly see why a lot of these guys will find it hard to be faithful, because they know that the moment they're married, they're going to be more appealing to women. And granted, there's research that actually supports this. It's called pre-selection bias. The whole idea that you are more attractive when you are a part of something committed or a part of a union as a man because you are already vetted by the other person that is your partner. All of that holds merit. But the other part that people fail to realize is that if women were turning men down, such that even though this guy wants to be unfaithful, there's a bunch of babes that he's trying to bang and all of them are saying no, it would be harder for him to be unfaithful. Would he try it? Yes. But he'd probably only ever try it if he knew that he'd have a shot. Especially if you get rejected a bunch of times, most guys usually just roll back up and they don't try anything. Because they know very well if they try, then not only will they be rejected, but they'll also be humiliated. Why is a married man trying to sleep with me? Shit like that is something that especially if it falls under your name and fucks up your reputation as a guy, can end up going back to your family, which will just make everything in your household look bad. Because the moment now you go back home, if your wife knows, then it's gonna start to affect her because she's gonna feel like she's not adequate. So now that's going to increase the number of troubles that you have. And the moment the two of you are having issues, it's not like it won't bleed over to the kids, and it just affects shit and it just makes things worse. So granted, yes, I am probably overthinking the effect of being rejected thing, but evidently, like, it's not like there is going to be a shortage of unfaithful men. But at the end of the day, because there's a lot more women that are a lot more comfortable with being with an unfaithful man, knowing very well that this man is unfaithful, I don't know, maybe the hope is that they'll probably try and be faithful with them, or, they'd probably be great to shag, or, great to benefit from. Then the men will continue being unfaithful because they can see some sort of chance that they could get something from the shorties that, are giving opportunities to these married men. Although, then again, considering that I'm neither married, nor have I ever been married, nor have I ever cheated on my married partner, probably my understanding on this is all skewed. Maybe I need to go and get a married man who's cheated on their partner, or someone who's cheated on their partner before, to give a little bit more views on this. So I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. On Facebook and on IG, it is at the Breaktime Podcast and at the Breaktime_podcast, respectively. If you don't want to use social media, there's a link in the description to give your feedback to me directly. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.